We welcome you to Glass Academy Webinars 2022-23. The theme for this year is Ideas in Architecture, where I stands for innovation, D is for design thinking, E is for emerging trends, and A is for around the world, and S is for sensibility. Today we have with us architect Mahesh Bangad. Mahesh is an associate professor at Dr. Bhanuved Nanavati College of Architecture, BNCA, in Pune, India. He is currently the coordinator for BR course at BNCA. He has a master's in project management from Manchester, UK, a certificate diploma in Indian art and architecture, and holds a master's in environmental architecture and planning from Savitribai Phule, Pune University, SPPU, Pune, with his bachelor's also being from the same college. Mahesh conducts workshops and delivers talks on project management in building construction, risk management, vernacular architecture, and thinking design for colleges across India on various forums, including the annual and zonal NASA conventions. He has been invited by institutes as a motivational speaker and also for conducting elective subjects of design thinking, risk and project management, etc. Welcome. We are delighted to have you here with us and we are looking forward to your presentation. Let's hear from you on the topic, Thinking Design, Design Sensibilities. Over to you, Architect Mahesh.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kanchan, and thank you, Team Ethos. It's a pleasure being on this platform and especially Glass Academy, which is well revered and very well followed by people. During the COVID times when we went online, I too followed a lot of webinars on Glass Academy. It's been a good learning platform and actually, to be honest, it's a lot of resource accessible at your fingertips. And I think students will largely benefit through all of these resources that are being provided by Ethos through the Glass Academy. So I'll quickly share my screen and we can begin the talk. Yes, the talk today doesn't really focus on one aspect of sensibility. It actually talks about how at thinking design level, how at generating the ideas, the theme of this webinar series, where all sensitivity comes into play and how can we actually use these climate context and culture as aspects while designing. I've taken a few examples across the globe, and I hope this helps the listeners in one way or the another. As we begin, I want to put forth what Paul Rand said. Design is so simple, that's why it's so complicated. I think there is no one fit definition for design, but I think this comes closest to what design could be. Design is so simple that it becomes complex as you start disintegrating it into various aspects of design. This is when you realize that design is not one thing. There is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. Design encompasses everything around us. And when you look at a design, you ask yourself, why, how, and what makes a good design a good design? Why do you feel a certain space creates a certain emotion when you step into it? Be it Korea's Ayuka in Pune or Doshi's Aranya Housing, or be it Achut Kanvinde's NIBM campus in Pune. When you go to these places, you realize that these spaces create an impact. And how does this impact get affected or created? Is because the architects, the designers have been sensible enough to imbibe the various design principles that actually make a design so simple yet so complicated. C. Scott, another famous designer, says, I really like looking at design and thinking that attention to detail must have taken absolutely ages. Look at the Eiffel Tower or look at the Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion. What is architecture? What is the impact of architecture? It is the detailing in which these are designed. Or, for that matter, Philip Johnson's architecture. What makes a design a good design? What are the attributes that make this design? You can tag them as good designs. Or for that matter, how do you describe a good design? What attributes do you highlight? What do you say that this aspect is good in this design, this is not good. I think this presentation will focus largely on trying to find the answers to these two questions. And you'll realize that all master architects in India have focused on creating good designs through sense and sensitivity. Looking at architectural design concepts, I think, though it's a very dreaded word in the architectural vocabulary in schools and colleges of architecture, but if you look at concepts, they are more of abstract ideas. They are an intention of the designer that add value to architecture. More importantly, it is not one thing that you say is architecture. You create an idea, a notion, or a theory and stick to it by conviction and let people opine on it. Let's say in simple terms, it's the way a designer responds to the design situation presented to them. I remember going to the Jawahar Kala Kendra in Jaipur recently, and when you enter the court, you associate yourself with the culture of Rajasthan. The steps, the stepwell concept, the red sandstone. How was this feeling similar for everybody who goes to the JKK? It is because the architect, Korea, looked at responding to the culture of the place, the climate of the place, and most importantly, the context in which he was designing. And to me, great architecture is about this response. It is about creating meaningful spaces, user friendly spaces that elevate the quality of living of its users, spaces that define the experiences of people, spaces that some of the modern masters have wonderfully designed, planned, and envisaged, spaces that are sensibly designed to inspire, that have gone beyond the normal. We are going to look at some examples through the presentation, and I'm sure you will understand why I say so. Meanwhile, Do Cranmer says, design is the key to everything. If you learn how to design, you can do anything. I think he isn't wrong, because right from the furniture that I'm sitting on right now, to the cabin I'm in, to the space floor plate I am on, to this room that is designed, to this building that is designed, design is everywhere. To the watch I wear, to the mobile phone I use, to this medium of online communication that we are in. Design is the key to everything. And this key, I think, we already know who they are, but I would still like to touch upon who these people, who these great masters have been. Nari Gandhi, somebody who defined architecture on site more than creating drawings. Christopher Charles Benninger, of course, we all know, has been creating architecture world around, which is more context based and responds to its climate. Same was with Anant Raze. Anant Raze created architecture which was sensible, using a material that was so local for everyone, brick. Special for all these people is the sensibility that they had towards addressing what was available to them in terms of material, skill set, also resources. Ilyu Chaudhary, the first woman architect of India, somebody who actually took pride in calling herself an architect. Hema Sankalia, the first registered architect of the Council of Architecture, the first woman registered architect. Revati Kamat's work is world renowned. She, with her husband, designed architecture that used local materials, looked at local climate response, also created spaces that were budget friendly. And so was Laurie Baker's work. Laurie Baker, known as the Gandhian of architecture, looked at architecture in the light of providing livelihoods as well as creating shelters for people. Though she, unfortunately, not amongst us anymore, has been instrumental in creating architecture over 6 decades of architecture that had meaning, that responded to people, that added value to the lives of the people. And such was architecture of Korea. Korea designed geometric architecture across the globe, but also broke the pattern when needed. When I look at these 11 people I'm presenting here, I can actually connect these Indian modern masters through the spaces that they designed into these 11 points that I think they all easily represented. All of them were okay to testing technology. They actually looked at technology as a tool of creating better architecture. Also, they looked at bending the rules. They didn't stick to their own rules so much so that they created similar architecture. I think good, sensible architect or a good designer would look at adapting to his own or her own design to the uh, set uh, from the set preset into the available rule set. Most of them didn't leave their principles while making design decisions. I think as young designers, all of us should look at sticking to our principles. I was going online through a few videos, and I found this wonderful video by Sketches by Franco Gehry. And I realized how great master architects take pen and paper as their tool to express ideas. I think sketching concepts is a good tool. And all of them are addressing a very important concern is of problem solving. In the meanwhile, while all these Indian modern architects were doing their architecture, presenting their architecture, they were still getting noticed. It was not a race to become the best in the country or become a page three architect. Also, if you look at the Madhya Pradesh Housing Board architecture by Doshi, or you look at the Ayuka in Pune by Korea, and then you look at the Champali Mod building in Portugal by Korea, you see they have switched their gears. They don't do same looking architecture, not a factory made architecture. I think in the contemporary times, architects need to respond to the requirement of what the context is demanding. What is the client demanding is first, but what does the context demand? Meanwhile, while doing so, you have to mind your environment. I think the success of Raj Rewal or Kanvinde or Laurie Baker or Nari Gandhi was them respecting the environment they were building in. And you look at the modern other architects who are currently practicing, be it Sanjay Prakash, Sanjay Mohe, Sanjay Patil, all of them in their context are minding the environment while presenting their designs. A lot of architects also look at repurposing architecture. They don't just look at creating on greenfield sites. A lot of them look at brownfield sites as well. I think that sensibility is also very important to understand where you are intervening into the built fabric of the world. And that is where combining old and the new becomes so important. All in all, one very important aspect that covers or becomes the overarching value of these architects is that they were all inspired always. They were inspired to address contemporary issues through design by creating a change in architectural scenarios over the world. But this short 4-word sentence, I think, has a deeper meaning when you look at the architecture of these modern architects. Think more, design less. Ellen Lupton says, you spend so much more time in thinking so that you don't over design things. I think one of the important aspects of such uh, sessions that we deliver across to our students or to young designers is to tell them not to over design. The problem in modern times is that we are looking at designing more and giving lesser thought to it. I think it should work the other way around. Meanwhile, all of us have been through this image. I'm sure we have all understood it as a cyclic process, design being so cyclic in its nature that it follows these steps of defining the problem, collecting information, brainstorming, developing solutions, presenting and taking feedback, and then again improving design, again going back to defining the problem, and also going back and forth. So my opinion about on this design process is that instead of us looking at it as a cyclic process, we should also look at it parallelly as a lateral process as well. Maybe a step or two may get added. My next few slides will speak about it. But meanwhile, we'll just listen to a small video which actually makes it easier for all of us to understand why we have to be sensible while addressing the smallest of the concern in design. And I'm not talking about built architecture here. I'm talking about a product also. Why do designers have to be so sensitive towards addressing concerns? And then ask ourselves, does good architecture actually follow this process? And when we, in retrospection, look at various examples, we realize, yes, there must have been so much thought that have that has gone into addressing the concerns of these people, the locals, the users, the visitors, the climate, the culture, the context, the material, the skill set, the finances. So many things get parallelly defined while creating sensible architecture. We'll listen to a small video clip here.
Design thinking is a five-step process to come up with meaningful ideas that solve real problems for a particular group of people. The process is taught in top design and business schools around the world. It has brought many businesses lots of happy customers and helped entrepreneurs from all around the world to solve problems with innovative new solutions. Step 1. Empathize. The purpose of Step 1 is to conduct interviews that give you an idea about what people really care about. We need to empathize with their situation. For example, if you want to help old people, you might find that they want to keep the ability to walk around. In your conversations, they might share with you different ways they can do that. Later into the interview, you'll want to dig a little deeper, look for personal stories or situations where things became difficult. Ideally, you redo the process with many people with the same problem. Step 2. Define the problem. Looking at the interviews, you can now understand the actual needs that people are trying to fulfill with certain activities. One way to do that is to underline the verbs or activities that the people mentioned when talking about their problems, like going for a walk, meeting old friends for tea, or simply going grocery shopping around the corner store. You might realize it's not so much about going out, but more about staying in touch. After your analysis, formulate a problem statement. Some elderly are afraid to be lonely. They want to stay connected. Step 3. Ideate. Now focus only on the problem statement and come up with ideas that solve the problem. The point is not to get a perfect idea, but rather to come up with many ideas, like unique virtual reality experiences, senior-friendly hoverboards, or a modified pushcart. Whatever it is, sketch up your best ideas and show them to the people you are trying to help, so you can get their feedback. Step 4. Prototype. Now take a moment to reflect on what you have learned from your conversations about the different ideas. Ask yourself, how does your idea fit in the context of people's actual lives? Your solution could be a combination of a new idea and what is already being used. Then connect the dots, sketch up your final solution, and go build a real prototype that's just good enough to be tested. Step 5. Test. Now test your prototype with actual users. Don't defend your idea in case people don't like it. The point is to learn what works and what didn't, so any feedback is great. Then go back to ideation or prototyping and apply your learning. Repeat the process until you have a prototype that works and solves the real problem. Now you are ready to change the world or open shop.
So I think the video kind of sums up how people address design thinking processes. But when I look at it as a way of problem solving and innovative competitive advantage, I also look at two important aspects of observing and creating multiple views. For example, when you are trying to address the contemporary world problems that we are focusing on, let's say we are looking at creating architecture that addresses major city level problems or urban issues, and then we're also looking at solving problems at a community level or a micro level site. We are forgetting to observe around the site. We're forgetting to take into account various multiple views on the topic. And that is when creative thinking becomes very important. We have to look at creative thinking as a tool to address these concerns of design thinking, where there are two options, there are two ways of thinking here. These two modes of thinking are the usual divergent mode of thinking and the convergent mode of thinking. The divergent mode looks at imagination as a tool, The conversion mode looks at logic as a tool. But as good designers, as sensible designers, as people who are trying to address issues that we face day to day, I think together as lateral thinkers, we have to use both. We have to collect facts and create an answer from it, then look at the question and then ideate using these facts to create more of creative solutions. So I think to go outside the box, or at times to think that there is no box, is the way forward for all of us. Obviously, as thinkers, as designers, we make our typical mind maps. We look at various thought process, the problems that could be faced. And meanwhile, while we are doing all of this, we are also looking at the hats and still design. You have to look at the black, the white, the blue, the yellow, the red, and the green simultaneously while addressing design. Just to add to the little fun element of this talk and to make it a little more interesting, I thought, how do you really develop this sense of designing into people? To understand that aspect, I would appreciate all of you listening to this another clip.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Point is, it's easy to miss something that you're not looking for. And this is what happens when designers go to the site. They miss something that they're not looking for. And I think sensible architecture evolves when you look at what you're trying to achieve through your design. So observation is the key, and a lot of designers fail to do that. I'm not pinpointing at someone or some typical thought process. I'm just saying that when you look at architecture, you don't look at it in isolation, is one. And two, you don't look at it only as aesthetics. We are not here to create makeup architecture. The intent is very pure, has to be addressing the concerns. So design is content with intent. Content without intent is just noise. And intent without content is decoration. I think this also makes a lot of difference when you understand the real meaning behind this sentence, that good design will have content, but also with an intent. A content without intent is just noise, and intent without content is decoration. When you look at design, design also impacts economy of a place. And how does it impact the economy of a place? I think all modern architecture across the globe today is impacting the economy of the places. I'll give you a small example. Let's look at the Eiffel Tower. Until the 1880s, it was not at all the highlight of the world. Of course, not built. But Paris was already redesigned by Haussmann, and it was not economically the stablest cities in the world. And then Gustav Eiffel builds the Eiffel Tower. And the moment he builds the Eiffel Tower, it becomes an attraction to the world. Good architecture, good engineering, adding value. It's the third most visited monuments in the world. And then nowadays, you have the statues, the tall buildings, all of them contributing towards generating tourism and economy and impacting the economy of the place. So architecture is directly helping impact the economy. Good architecture, I would say. And also design is the genesis of all of this. So design won't save the world, but you do realize that a good design adds a lot of value. We look at the Indian context and the work of Doshi becomes the highlight of it. How value systems get installed into good architecture, be it the Hussein Doshi Gufa or the Aranya housing or the SEPT campus, you find the same value systems imbibed. I'm not going to talk only about the Indian architects here. You look abroad and you also criticize so many of them for being forthright or being very bold about their architecture. But you also need to realize that design as a tool has been very effectively and wonderfully used by these master architects. Let's look at Franco Gehry's work. Gehry is known world over for his forthrightness, for being open about his opinions, but the kind of architectural impact he has created across the globe. There are a couple of examples that I've used, be it the Fred and Ginger building, the Dancing House, or the Guggenheim at Bilbao. The kind of impact these have created on the local economy, tourism, and the architectural scene around it has been quite phenomenal. And when you go to Calatrava's architecture, you go to Malmo or you go to Valencia, heavily criticized work like the City of Science and Arts at Valencia, where the government of Spain was already in a huge debt, and still Calatrava went ahead and created architecture which is now world renowned. The Turning Torso in Malmo or the Milacque Art Museum. Architecture that becomes landmark, architecture that sets into its context, architecture that responds to the need of the contemporary times. Same was the work of Tom Wright that created a hallmark of creating world's first 7-star hotel. Tom Wright's architecture for Burj Al Arab is essentially a very important landmark in engineering as well. To create a man-made island with geopositioned stones as a foundation is way forward. And then you look at an example that has become the icon of an entire continent, not just a city. John Woodzohn's famous design of the Sydney Opera House. The idea of creating a landmark building that would years later, become the icon of the entire continent is unbelievable. Also, when you look at mimesis in architecture or when you look at inspiration from nature, you can't do away without the example of Lotus Temple. Sahaba created architecture that not just responded to one religion, but responded to several religions across the globe. And a city that gets defined by the skyline, London, which is largely defined by the architecture of Foster. The Gherkin, well, looks simple, but it's a complex design, but still sensible approach. And a similar modern approach, which went into parametricism and did away with the typical trabeated system, is the Bird's Nest or the Beijing National Stadium. It was an icon by itself. It was a complex geometry that created the entire elevation of the skin of this stadium. So I think good design becomes obvious, but great design becomes transparent. It addresses modern day problems. It becomes easy to understand and easy to read. It's a very small clip now, and this is towards the end of the presentation that we're talking about. The basic geometry, the basic principles of architecture that everybody sees around themselves. I think this video covers those graphically, but if you look at good architecture, sensible architecture, it is very, very important to understand that they all necessarily follow such principles. It's a very small representation of how ideas get represented as basic genesis of design. So finally, design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Steve Jobs says it is how it works. And I think most of the sensitive architecture, most of the sensible designers have always looked at addressing not just the looks of it or feels of it, but how the architecture would finally work or address the user's needs or its context or climate or culture or people or even habits for that matter. So thank you very much. And it is a pleasure connecting with all of you.
Thank you, Architect Mahesh, and thank you so much for showing us through your projects and insight into sensible design and design thinking. I'm sure our viewers have a lot of learnings to take away from your presentation, and they must be curious to know more, myself included. I would like to take this opportunity to ask you a few questions.
Yes, sure.
I understand that architectural practice is a bit far-fetched from design theory. As a part of many institutions that you've been in your
Question. Are we addressing the real concern of making good designers? And then one of the senior designers said, what is a good designer? Are we really defining a quality of a designer? I think you made a valid point that how do you integrate good design thinking processes into syllabi? It starts with the orientation where the students from day one are told to look at design not as a product, but as a process. I think most of the design schools in India are failing at a point where they look at design as a product. And I think if we define or disintegrate design as a process and slow learning process into various design schools, organizations, the architecture syllabus, the interior design syllabus for that matter, if we start defining the process and the final destination where you want your students to reach, where you want your designers to reach, then that process will become interesting also and worthy as well. Problem today is we are looking semester to semester, design this, product that, design this, product that, but not the process of learning. So yeah, to answer what you asked is, yeah, we should look at design as a process-based product than rather than to look at it as uh, just product or just one thing. And for that, I think maybe the Council of Architecture or I think Ethos has been a wonderful platform, and so has been the Glass Academy. These are taking these pertinent topics and issues to the common masses, and more design education can happen through these platforms as well.
for your answer. For my next question, I'd like to ask you, what are the important elements in design thinking? For example, what are the questions that you ask yourself and try to answer during the design process?
That's also a wonderful question. I think the process was shown in the video while I shared the presentation, but the questions are very, very important. I think every designer must ask themselves, have I been true to what I want to design? Most importantly, humbleness is very important in design approaches. Problem arises when people do non-contextual designs or they have certain fancy ideas about designing. I do understand that every designer wants to have a hallmark project, great work, but are they humble enough to go down to that level to design with that sensibility to address concerns of the user? As a design thinking process, first is humility, second is understanding the local context, respecting the culture, uh, having complete understanding of the climate in which the design is being done, and knowing what materials we are going to use. This comes from the context as well. But topmost on priority would again be user concern. User satisfaction is the most important concern of design thinking process.
Thank you. For my last question, I'd like to ask you, according to you, what is the role of empathy in design research? Like you've already shown in your presentation, a little bit elaboration on that, and how one can integrate in practice? Like, how does empathy shape the overall design?
Lovely. I think empathy, we recently did a workshop on the power of empathy. And I realized that empathy is not about one thing. Empathy is about being concerned about people, flora, fauna, material, the soil on site. I think there is very less research. I wouldn't say too less, but uh, there is this disparity between theory and practice getting integrated. People are reading a lot but not applying into architecture. People are practicing architecture but not really addressing, I would say, not addressing the same in through theory or through built forms. So I think this disparity, this disconnect between theory and practice could go away if you are empathic, if you empathize between the user, their needs, the context, its requirement, respond to the climate, like I said previously. But most important aspect, I think, where designers are trying to focus but not addressing is all of this learning, this design education should happen at the schooling level rather than just architecture college. I think this empathy, power of empathy should be embedded into the minds of young designers, because mind you, we are constantly talking about convergent thinking and divergent thinking, but the best thinking happens during the younger years of design thinking. And I think it is that age where you imbibe this empathy into the minds of people. And then during the architecture school, you make them address social problems, real life problems, give them design problems that make them go to the site, talk to the user, talk to the person whom they are designing for. I remember taking part in the competitions by Ethos. So many of them address real life problems. Or I remember also the transparency that happens as a competition. All of these competitions are trying to present real life scenarios. I think thesis students, fourth year design, urban design students should look at taking up these real life problems as a design problem, where they use empathy as their tool to make design decision. That is when the real sensibility will set into people, and we will start looking at a slow change in good architecture as well.
Thank you so much for sharing your views. And this has been a very informative and inspiring session. On behalf of all of us at Glass Academy and Ethos, I'd like to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you, Architect.
Thank you, Kanchan. Thank you so much. Thank you, Team Ethos, and thank you, Glass Academy.